can begin any moment from now. Okay.
Okay. So today we will be moving on to our final um, topic or unit for the BEC science exam, and it is biology and human disease. So let's start with the human systems first. So the primary purpose of respiration in man is to take in oxygen or release carbon dioxide or regulate body temperatures. So it tells us that regulating body temperature is not the primary purpose of respiration. Body temperature is rather controlled by the circulatory and the nervous system to make us start sweating or shivering. But it is true that it takes in oxygen and it releases carbon dioxide in respiration system, but it doesn't regulate the body temperature. So the answer must be D, which is just one and two. And on the right, here is how the respiratory system is made. And I will zoom into it a little deeper. So here's the same picture that we saw, but with the interior. Sorry, I think there is a little siren going on, so I might have to mute a little bit, but continue now. Yeah, so as I was saying, this was just the interior part of our respiratory system. So it start with our nose or with our mouth as it connects our nasal cavity all the way down into the trachea, to the bronchi where it splits into both of the lungs. And inside the lungs are alveoli, which are these tiny, tiny buds that make up the lung. So these are like sacs where oxygen comes in through the bronchioles. So the bronchioles are the smaller branches of the bronchi. And it moves into these tiny sacs of alveoli. And there are around 300 million alveoli in our lungs. And this allows us to transfer oxygen and release carbon dioxide at a really, really fast rate. More alveoli means that there is more surface for oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange to occur. So here's the process where that occurs. The red blood cells, which lack in oxygen, comes in contact with alveoli, and carbon dioxide moves by diffusion across, and also oxygen comes into the red blood cells to make them oxygenated for them to travel to the rest of our bodies. And oxygen also diffuses into the blood. So this is how the respiratory system plays a huge part. And here's how it can also connect to our circulatory system. So circulatory system, again, is the um, system of our blood and how it is distributed to the rest of our body. So it starts from um, the lack of oxygen blood as it crosses. I'm not sure where it got cut off, but um, I was just getting started on this slide. Um, but can you hear me now? Is this okay? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, David, we can hear you.
Okay. Since it was cutting out a little bit, but I was just concluding that how this was the process of the respiratory system, and it can also connect to the circulatory system. So, circulatory system, as it goes through the systematic circulation, it has a less oxygenated blood that crosses the right atrium, is over here. And it crosses the right ventricle as well. And it goes through the pulmonary artery, and that's how it gets to our lungs. And through our respiratory system, where we breathe in oxygen in the alveoli, like we saw here, these are alveoli. This is where um, in our lungs occur, and oxygen exchange occurs as carbon dioxide leaves the red blood cells and the oxygen goes into red blood cells. And as it is oxygenated in the alveoli, it moves it back into the pulmonary vein. That's the next step. And then it goes into the left atrium of the heart. These parts are called atrium. And then it moves to the left ventricle. Again, both of these parts are called ventricles. These are called atriums. And then it moves into this aorta, which is the main artery. And then from here, it goes into the systemic circulation where it distributes blood to the rest of our body. So this is a brief overview of how oxygen exchange occurs. And oxygen exchange occurs actually in this place called the capillaries. So you can think of blood vessels being of three main types: the artery, the vein, and the capillaries. So capillaries are really thin and small blood vessels that allows for oxygen, for air and nutrient exchange to occur because it is so thin. But once the oxygenated blood filled with oxygen leaves the aorta and goes through the systematic circulation, the oxygen poor blood then returns through the vena cava to the right atrium, and then the cycle repeats again. But I will describe a little more in detail in just a bit. But the main point is to connect it to the pulmonary circulation, where it connects to oxygen exchange. And let's look at this theory question. The diagram below is the illustration of a part of a system in human. So name the system illustrated. You can see that these are two lungs. So we know it's the respiratory system. You can kind of see the lung sacs and the small alveoli over here a little bit. So you can tell it is a respiratory system. And two, name each of the parts labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, all of these parts. Before I continue, I see that the screen is frozen. Can you hear me okay? Um, let's see. Okay, yeah, this sounds good. So the part labeled 1 is the larynx, also called the voice box. The part labeled 2, like right here, is called the trachea. This is where the wind goes through the air. It's also called the windpipe. Number 3, this is called the bronchus. If it is a plural, then you call it a bronchi. Then it goes into here, number 4, which is the lung. This makes up the respiratory system. And number 3, name 3 diseases that affects the system illustrated. A couple of respiratory diseases that you might need to know are pneumonia. It can also cause influenza, um, tuberculosis, common cold, bronchitis, lung cancer, and recently COVID-19 is also a part of a respiratory disease. So here are some diseases that you might need to know related to respiratory system. But then it asks, what is the role of the larynx? And it is for voice production. For us to make voice, the larynx takes a huge part, and it helps us breathe, and it protects the airway as the larynx closes during swallowing to prevent food from entering the trachea. So once we take in something through our nose or through our mouth, it can either go through the trachea or it can go down the esophagus. But the esophagus is for the digestive system, is for the food. You don't want it to get mixed and accidentally go down the trachea, which is just for air. And the larynx helps us close the path by the glottis. So now we were moving a little bit to respiration and how it occurs. And the question asks, what is aerobic respiration? Aerobic respiration is a process by which cell breaks down glucose in the presence of oxygen to release energy. And it produces carbon dioxide, water, and a large amount of energy by ATP. So the important part is that respiration, just the word respiration, is the process by which cell breaks down glucose to release energy. So this is just the parts for respiration. But this aerobic, this word, means that it has oxygen, presence of oxygen. You can think of aerobic as having oxygen as and anaerobic having no oxygen. So an is like a prefix for not existing. So anaerobic means no oxygen. But here it said aerobic, so it has oxygen. And it produces from glucose and oxygen to carbon dioxide, water, and energy. That's the respiration, aerobic respiration. And also aerobic respiration occurs within the mitochondria in the cell. You might have heard that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and that is especially true for respiration as energy is made. And here is the connection part where it asks us to state the main difference between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. And we already talked about a few. So aerobic means oxygen is required. So this is plus oxygen, and this is minus oxygen. So it does not have oxygen. It does not require oxygen to go through the anaerobic respiration. Compared to anaerobic respiration, where less energy is produced, in aerobic, a lot of energy is produced. And there is also a difference in the resulting products. So, aerobic, we talked about how carbon dioxide and water are produced. We can go back here. Here. From glucose, a source of energy, and if we have also oxygen, then it goes through cellular respiration, aerobic respiration to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. This is really important. And that's how carbon dioxide and water are produced. But in anaerobic respiration, rather than water, water is not produced because there is no oxygen. Yeah, sorry about that. The sound I think is gone now, so we can continue. So again, aerobic respiration, carbon dioxide and water is produced. But in anaerobic respiration, alcohol is rather produced. Carbon dioxide is also produced. It's the same for aerobic respiration. But the difference is alcohol or lactic acid being produced and not water. And in anaerobic respiration, it happens in the cytoplasm. There's another alarm going on, so I have to mute a little bit. Sorry, I think I can continue the lesson right now. So, okay. There's a frequent disruption right now, but where I just left off was that anaerobic happens in cytoplasm and aerobic happens in the mitochondria. So that is the big part. And the next question is which of the following statements about aerobic and anaerobic respiration is not correct? The water is produced by a byproduct in anaerobic respiration. Alcohol or lactic acid is produced in anaerobic respiration, or no oxygen is required in anaerobic respiration, or very little energy is released in anaerobic respiration. So the answer I put here is A. This is because A is not correct. Here we're looking for something not correct. Water is not produced as a byproduct in anaerobic respiration. So we certainly know that this is not correct. So that is why I picked A. But let's look at the other answers too. Alcohol or lactic acid is produced in anaerobic respiration. That is right. No oxygen is required in anaerobic respiration. Again, anaerobic, no oxygen. Yes. And very little energy is released in anaerobic respiration, and that is correct, relative to aerobic respiration. So the answer is A. And this diagram um, makes a really good um, example of what aerobic and anaerobic respiration does. So from glucose, as it goes through the glycolysis process, it results in two pyruvate molecules. But again, this can go through anaerobic, which produces alcohol or lactic acid. If there is oxygen, it produces carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So that is the general process. But now let's return a little bit to our circulatory system. So this is about our heart and our blood. Moving back to this figure, figure 1A, is an illustration of a longitudinal section of the mammalian heart. First question asks us to state one function for each of the parts labeled 1, 2, 4, and 9 and 10. So 1, it's over here. Remember that is the aorta because it is located on the left atrium and it follows from the left ventricle. And from that, it goes out into the aorta. The function of the aorta is to carry blood from the heart to the rest of their body. Next, it is 2. 2 is over here, this part. And this part is the pulmonary vein. It brings oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart into the left atrium. And 9 is over here. This part is the superior vena cava. So vena cava is where it brings deoxygenated blood from our body to our heart. But the superior vena cava, where it is at the top over here, is where it carries blood from the upper part of our body. This is where blood from our upper body goes into our right atrium. Finally, number 10. Where is number 10? It's over here. So this part. This part of the diagram is the pulmonary artery. Right here. Always think about arteries as leaving the heart and veins as returning to the heart. So this is leaving the heart, so it is a pulmonary artery. It's an artery. It carries deoxygenated blood from the lungs, from the heart to the lungs. It carries the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. And number 2, explain briefly why the left lower part of the heart has a thicker muscle. So the left lower part, probably talking about this part over here, it's thicker because it contracts to pump oxygenated blood with high pressure to all parts of the body. It requires a lot of muscle to pump the blood. High pressure. So this is the general pathway the blood flows through the heart. I've already talked about this a little bit before, But here, first step, it's important to note that it returns to the vena cava. So as it goes back into our heart for the vena cava, it enters the right atrium. And it's important to note that although this looks like the left atrium, this is actually the right part of our heart. So that's why this is called the right atrium. So blood from our body goes into the right atrium, and then it goes through the right AV valve to this right ventricle. Right ventricle, from here, it goes into the pulmonary arteries, leaving the heart to the lungs. And to the lungs, oxygen exchange occurs, and it goes back to the pulmonary veins, and then enters the left atrium, and then to left ventricle, and then to the aorta to the rest of our body. So that was the brief overview of how the blood follows through our heart. And once it goes through the aorta to the rest of our body, this is where the systemic circulation occurs. It has our parts of our bodies are connected with are filled up with these tiny capillaries. And what these capillaries do is that they try to contact with many cells as possible. And through contact, nutrients or oxygen can be diffused or um, go across the blood from the blood vessels into our cells. So that is how it can go through and support our body systems. State two ways by which the flow of blood to and from the mammalian heart, as shown in figure 1a, can be kept at acceptable levels. So the flow of blood can be kept at acceptable levels by regular exercise. So if we exercise regularly, it helps strengthen the heart muscles, and it also improves blood circulation and keeps the blood vessels healthy. It's also important to have a healthy diet. A diet low in saturated fats, salts, and sugar help maintain normal blood pressure and cholesterol levels. And also another important way to keep our flow of blood healthy is to avoid smoking, manage stress, and have regular medical checkups. The last part asks us to name two parts of the heart where oxygenated blood can be found. So, oxygenated blood, all of them you can say are on the left side over here. So, all of the oxygenated blood are on the left side. So, you can pick any of these. You can pick the pulmonary veins, the left atrium, left ventricle, or even some part of the aorta that is inside the heart. Yeah, all of these are where oxygenated blood can be found. And here's the difference between arteries and veins. So artery is leaving from the heart. So that is why it needs thicker walls and a lot of muscles because the pump from the heart, the pressure is very strong, and the artery must be able to support that. So it has thicker layers inside. And as it crosses The capillaries, it goes into the veins as it returns to the heart. And since the pressure is lower, it requires an additional force to push the blood back to our heart. And that is done by these valves. It contains valves. That's the main difference between arteries and veins. Although it has less thicker walls, it has valves to push the blood back to our heart. And just remember, it goes from arteries, capillaries, and to veins. That's the blood vessels and how it goes to our body and returns to our heart. I think this is one of the last questions with the circulatory system. So, which of the following statements distinguishes arteries from veins? We're looking at differences. So arteries, is it that arteries have relatively narrow lumen, while veins have relatively wide lumen? Is it arteries transport blood to the heart, while veins carry blood away from the heart? Or is it that arteries carry deoxygenated blood, while veins carry oxygenated blood? Or is it D, arteries have valves, while veins do not have valves? And from these differences, we can see that arteries have small lumen, veins have large lumen. So that corresponds with A. And for B, arteries transport blood to the heart while veins carry blood away from the heart. This is the opposite. As veins carry blood to the heart and arteries transport blood away from the heart. And oxygenated blood contain high level of oxygen, and arteries carry oxygenated blood away from the heart, and veins carry deoxygenated blood. But there is one exception, which is the pulmonary arteries and veins, because arteries are still blood vessels that go away from the heart. But what goes away from the heart as it returns is deoxygenated. And what returns to the heart is oxygenated from the lungs. So that is the only exception. So venous blood, which lacks oxygen, looks like this, and arterial blood actually looks bright red because it is oxygen rich. Can see even by the colors. This question asks us to state one function, each of the following components of the blood. So the red blood cells, which over here, transport oxygen from the lungs to all parts of the body. These are white blood cells, which is also in our blood, and it defends the body against infections by attacking germs and foreign substances. Finally, the blood plasma carries nutrients, hormones, and waste products through the blood, and as it expels throughout our body. So these are the three main parts, the components of the blood. And the function of the white blood cells in humans is it to produce hemoglobin? Is it to ensure blood clot during an injury? Or is it to produce antibodies to engulf disease-causing organisms? Or is it D, to produce digestive enzyme? So the answer is C, because the rest of our body, the rest of the answer choices are incorrect. The main function of the white blood cells is to produce antibodies. So here, as you can see, the antibodies being produced, and white blood cells help the body fight infections and diseases as it attacks and destroys harmful bacteria and viruses. It's the purpose of white blood cells. But we're moving on to the digestive system. And digestion of rice humans start from the. Does anyone know the answer to this question? Does it start from the stomach, the gullet, the mouth, or the colon? I think I heard C, and that would be correct. C is the correct answer. Every digestion starts from the mouth as it is taken up. And here is the general process. So mouth chews the food, mixes with saliva, and it goes down the esophagus. And it goes all the way down into the stomach, which looks like this. From the stomach, it goes into our small intestines, which are all these wiggly parts. These are all small intestine. All of this is small intestine. And after the small intestines, it moves into this large intestine, is the larger part. After it goes through the large intestine, it is expelled through the anus. And the important part is that the stomach secretes acid. It breaks down the food here, breaks it down in the stomach. And the small intestine is where the broken down substances get absorbed. And it connects to our circulatory system, into the bloodstream. Large intestine absorb water, forms feces, but there are other parts in the digestive system that takes part, like the liver, which looks like this. That is the liver. And liver produces bile. And it is connected to this small intestine. And this gallbladder over here. Gallbladder stores and releases bile. And it is connected to our small intestines. And there's also a pancreas over here in the back of the stomach. And it also produces digestive enzyme. So that is the system where we digest food and expel it through the anus. So this next theory question. List in the correct order the organs through which food passes from the mouth to the anus. We have just talked about from the mouth to the esophagus and to the stomach, to the small intestine, to the large intestine, and out through the anus. That is the order of how food passes. And The next question. Digestion of protein begins in the stomach and ends in the. Is it the large intestine? Or is it the small intestine? Is it the appendix? Or the cecum? Does anyone know the answer to this question? I think I heard B, and B would be correct. The answer is B. And that is because um, it's talking about the digestion of protein. And remember how nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. So in the stomach, enzymes like pepsin break down large proteins into smaller chains called peptides. And in the small intestine, enzymes from the pancreas continue to break down peptides into amino acids, and they're absorbed into our blood. This next picture gives us a clearer sense. So, the most important thing to a takeaway message from this is that small intestine is where the nutrient absorption happens. So, these are the steps. In the stomach, the whole proteins are chewed. So, once we eat a food, they're in these chunks of proteins. These chunks of proteins are unfolded. It's like a string now. It's unfolded in the stomach. And it is also cut into shorter polypeptides. It's cut in the stomach. In the small intestine, these cut pieces break further down into amino acids, these tiny circles. And then these can diffuse across the bloodstream. And how this transfusion to the bloodstream occurs is in the villi. Villi are these tiny, tiny bumps in our small intestines. In our small intestines, you can see these bumps. And in these bumps are also microvilli. And villi are just these bumps that are just happening in our small intestines. Our small intestines are covered in villi. And it allows for even more contact through microvilli. Even within these bumps, there are tinier bumps. So the purpose is to get and absorb as much nutrient as possible. That's why it's so small. These are the folds in the small intestines, and we can move on to this next question. Which of the end product of the digestion, um, what is the end product of the digestion of each of the following? So this question is asking about components. So meat is abundant in protein. So protein is broken down into polypeptides and then to amino acids. Cassavas are abundant in starch. So it breaks down into glucose. Palm oil are filled with fats, and it breaks down into fatty acids or glycerols. So it's mainly talking about three groups in this question: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And in our digestive system, carbohydrates um, breaks down further into individual parts like glucose, or sucrose. In proteins, it breaks down into amino acids, and in fats, it breaks down into fatty acids. You're just asking about components, and this gives us a good summary. Carbohydrates are like rice, bread, cassava, potato, yam, fufu, and banku. And all of these are carbohydrates that you might have had before. And it digested through our mouth and through the small intestine. And the end product, after it has been fully digested, it converts to glucose or fructose. And it diffuses into our small intestines. And proteins are things like beans, fish, meat, eggs, milk. And it digested in stomach and small intestine. The end product is amino acid. Finally, fat, which are like oils, nuts, and butter. All of these are fat, and they occur in small intestines. And end products are fatty acids and glycerols. Does anyone have a question so far? With the digestive system?
Oh,
And another important thing to note is that things like, milk and beans is not completely proteins. Some foods are a mix of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. It can't, many of the foods are a mix. Yeah. Here it is talking about the digestive system of different animals. So one is that of a goat, and other is that of a rabbit. Outline three features that would help to differentiate between the two digestive systems. So differentiate the two digestive systems. So you can talk about the stomach structure, where goat has a stomach with four compartments, while rabbits have a simple stomach with only one compartment. You can also talk about things like rumination, where goats regurgitate and re-chew food. You can also talk about fermentation sites, where ruminants practice foregut fermentation, where microorganisms break down the food before it enters the small intestines. So ruminant animals are such as cow, goats, sheep, and deers. They regurgitate, they spit out the food, and then take it back in to aid digestion. It helps them digest. And these are just features of um, digestive systems of animals. And now we're moving on to the reproductive system. So the diagrams below are illustrations of the male and the female reproductive system for humans. So name each of the parts labeled 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and state the functions of 3, 4, and 7. So to name each of the labels, we have labeled the womb, which is the one part labeled here. And 2 is the fallopian tube. 5, these are ovaries. 6, this is the vas deferens. And I will get into detail of the functions in just a bit. You can think of vas deferens as just a pathway for the sperms to be transferred. And then also 7 is the penis. And number 8, these are the testes. And this is just where the sperms are produced. These are also called the gonads. So, and it also asks us to state the function. So let's get into the details. So details about the female reproductive system. First, we have the uterus or the womb. It's a muscular, hollow organ where fertilized eggs implants and where the fetus grows. And females have 2 ovaries on the left and on the right side. This is where ovulation occurs. Ovulation is the production of eggs and hormones like estrogen. And this next part over here is the fallopian tube. This is where the ovaries are connected to the womb. This is where the fertilization usually occurs, where the sperm meets the egg. So as the sperm travels through the fallopian tube, it meets the egg that was produced by the ovaries. And we have the cervix, which is the lower part of the uterus. And it is the birth canal opening during delivery. And then we have the vagina, which is the passage for menstrual flow, where its childbirth also occurs. This is the general explanations of functions of each part of the woman reproductive system. Here's a little close-up picture. So here you can see the ovaries producing the eggs. And once the sperm enters through this fallopian tube, it travels all the way to maybe to the near the ovaries where the egg exists. It was just produced, and as the sperm meets the egg, that's when fertilization occurs. And it forms what's called a zygote. When a sperm meets the egg, it forms a zygote. And then it starts to divide, divide, and divide through mitosis. And it travels to the uterus. So this is the cycle of how fetus is developed. So first it's the fertilized eggs, and then it divides, divides, divides as it travels to the womb. And as it implanted in the uterus, so as the cells travel through the fallopian tube, it's implanted here. And again, this just shows the fertilization process. And we can move on to the male reproductive system. So we have the testes, also called testicles, and their function is to produce sperm and the hormone, testosterone. There's also the scrotum, which function is to protect and regulate the temperature of the testes. There's also the epididymis, which function is to store a mature sperm. The sperm that is produced by the testes are stored in epididymis. It's this part. And the vas deferens, also called the sperm duct, the function is a tube that transports mature sperm from the epididymis to the urethra. Just over here. These were the general functions of parts of the male reproductive system. And a question might ask, which part of the human body stores sperms temporarily? And we have seen that it is the epididymis that stores and matures sperms before it is released. Rest of these are not necessarily related to storing sperm. Scrotus is regulating the temperature. Prostate glands produce fluids that mix with sperm. Sperm duct transports a mature sperm from the epididymis to the urethra. So this next question is to name the labeled parts where each of the following processes take place. So the fertilization, production of sperm, and ovulation. Fertilization happens in the fallopian tube. We've talked about that. And does anyone know where production of sperm happens? Well, the production of sperms happens in the testes. You can see here. Production of sperm. The function of testes is to produce sperms. So this over here. The next question. Where does ovulation happen? Does anyone know the answer? The ovulation happens in the ovaries. So go back. So here, when we talked about the function of the ovaries, we've said how it produces eggs, and the process of producing eggs is called ovulation. So it happens in the ovaries. Next question, name two common infectious diseases that affect both the male and female reproductive systems. You can say syphilis, herpes, uh, chancroid, all of these other diseases that are STDs. And the next question asks, what is teenage pregnancy? And teenage pregnancy is when female girls under the age of 20 gets pregnant. And the two causes for that can be from poverty, lack of sex education, rape, or even peer pressure. So I think, yeah, this was um, the reproductive system. And we are moving on. So the next question is the process by which metabolic wastes are removed from the body is the respiration, excretion, ingestion, or digestion. And this is the body system we will shortly talk about, which is excretion. It's the excretory system. It's where metabolic wastes are removed from our body. And just know that excretory system contains kidneys and urethra, the bladder, um, and basically what it occurs is that as veins or arteries enter the kidneys through the renal arteries, it consists of many smaller parts called nephrons. And in these nephrons, these renal arteries are connected. Although I didn't put a picture, you can kind of imagine how things like um, wastes and water is moved through diffusion across the renal arteries, and all of these, and all of these wastes are excreted through the ureter and collects in the bladder and is released out of the urethra. And then we are moving on to a little bit about cells and how there are differences between plant cells and animal cells. So, but before we move on, we just finished the whole chunk of human body systems. So does anyone have a question so far? So I was wondering, was everyone already familiar with the topic, or was it something new? Or so was everyone already familiar with the topic? Does anyone have a question? Was it something new, or was it difficult, or I just wanted a little bit of feedback? So yeah, if this was fine, I will maybe continue a little bit more before we end for today. But as I have said, we are moving now into um cells. So this question asks, chlorophyll helps plants absorb energy from the sun as they undergo the process of photosynthesis, and it is located in the structure called which of the following? Is it the chloroplast? Is it the mitochondrion? Is it the vacuole? Or is it the nucleus? Kind of says here that chlorophyll is a green pigment that's found inside the chloroplast. So these are chloroplasts that are inside the plants. These organelles, inside these organelles, there are these stacks called thylakoids. And on these thylakoids, there are pigments called chlorophylls, and that's what gives out the green color. So we can zoom in. So from the plant leaves to individual cells, and we zoom in further to chloroplasts, and then zoom in again to look at the thylakoids, and we can finally see the chlorophylls.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think it's since it's disconnecting a lot. Uh, I feel like it is better to continue from next time. Um, Continuing from where we left off today. So,
You were explaining something. Maybe you can complete that one, then you can end it. So
sorry, I cannot
you
hear
were
you.
explaining some last. You were explaining some last part before it went. So maybe you can just complete that one, the one you were explaining, so that we can end from there.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yes. I was saying that. Yeah, I was just saying that you were explaining something before the connection went off. So maybe you can just complete that explanation, then we can end it there.
Oh, okay, so um, I think it's still better to continue next time because, but we can start over the explanation for that slide a little bit because
All right, all right. Okay,
because
okay, no problem. That's that's
eh,
okay. That's okay. That's fine.
okay.
Yes.
And
Yes.
also
So then that will be tomorrow.
yes, that would be tomorrow.
Okay. All right.
And I also sent the email to the slides for today. I just sent it, so can you confirm that you received it?
All right. Yes. Yes. Received.
Okay, yeah.
BECE biology.
Yes, that is right.
Yes. Received. Received.
Okay. Because I believe the presentation doesn't have the ability to here. I think you can open it in Google Slides too for it to present if you would like to, but yeah, but
Okay.
tomorrow will be the last section before they take the BEC exam.
Yes. Exactly. Because the BECE will be next week. Next week. So I'm not sure we'll meet again, but maybe from next week there will be another batch. I guess.
Um,
Yes, but with these people, tomorrow will be their last day.
yes, tomorrow will be the last day, and we would resume back maybe sometime in July. Okay.
Mm, all right. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've confirmed to your email. I've confirmed, I've received it. So I've sent you a message.
Oh, yes, I received the confirmation.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I'll project it for them to go through it once again. Yes, at
Okay.
our own free time. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Have a nice day.
All right. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
All
So,
right. All right.
all right, bye everyone. Yeah.
Bye bye. Bye. Yeah. Hmm.